Hello, everyone. Welcome to another late night news flash here on your Sunday night. Thank you so much for joining us here. We have a great show and a very, very important show for you. Something you're probably going to see in the news a lot more. We are going to be on it first today. That is Israel. Their identity right now is hanging in the balance, according to the New York Times. Yes, it's this judicial overhaul thing that all these mainstream liberals are freaking out about. They have finally brought it up yet again for further consideration. If you remember last time, they agreed to postpone it. So they're about to fight on that again as lawmakers have to vote on whether to limit the court's power as one element of the government's plan to overhaul judicial authority. Can the Likud government get this passed in Israel? We will discuss. Also, we are taking a look at the disintegration of the DeSantis campaign and the continued efforts to try and bring that kind of failing puppy back on track. Big news coming out of the Senate today, where the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions voted to take a significant first step on a long road that could lead to far lower prices and better pharmaceutical drugs for Americans. You can guess who chaired that committee and brought that across the line. Also, we will give you a bit of a preview and also get you updated on some of the preliminary results of the critical Spanish elections as we take a look at how they're doing in an attempt to stop the far-right People's Party and Vox surging there. Kind of a continued thing that we're watching here on Newsflash, and really a lot of people over the world are watching, is the continued, far-rightification of European politics, from Marine Le Pen and National Rally in France to, all the way through to AfD in Germany, to Vox and PP in Spain, a People's Party there. It's a very interesting situation. We have some preliminary results here for you, kind of actually getting close to being pretty official results here at this time out of the Spanish election. So we'll get you those at the end of the show. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. Find out if Spain shifted to the far right. We'll break it down. Anyway, so when tens of thousands of Israelis marched up to Jerusalem this weekend to protest the far-right government's plan to limit judicial power, many were driven by an urgent fear that the government is trying to steal the country their grandparents and parents fought to build against the odds. It's really a feeling of looting, as if the country is their spoils and everything is theirs for the taking, said Mira Lapidot, 52, a museum curator of Tel Aviv. This desperate march in the middle of the heat wave over a 2,400-foot mountains that led to Jerusalem was a last chance to stop it. And honestly, let's be real about these protests. They've been very, very consistent, and they've kind of really been, frankly, allowed to fester and to continue by the Israeli government because, these are, literally, these are the Israelis. These are the chosen people of the state. These are the people who are allowed to have democracy. These are the people who are allowed to have rights in this country. Obviously, while there is a huge population both around the world and in very close proximity that used to live there that's had all their rights, including the rights to their own home, taken away. I mean, there's a really, all this, hand-wringing about, democracy, and it is is the true nature of the Jewish state changing, for good now. Comes alongside as we see videos coming out of Jerusalem where I believe it's East Jerusalem, the occupied parts of East Jerusalem, where there was an old woman who had her house taken by settlers, with the full backing of the Israeli government, obviously. And you can see, if you look up Mohammed Al-Kurd's Twitter feed, you can check that out. He's a really, really wonderful source on this stuff. Very, very eloquent speaker about this, and pretty much the only real guy who's represents or has been allowed to represent Palestine in the mainstream, for quite a while now, probably back to 2021 when the Sheikh Jarrah incidents, kind of began to happen. There's videos of this woman's stuff, her cabinets, her, furniture out on the street, taken away, and they're just sorted through by just dudes in kippahs, and it's like, damn, if there's not, and there's videos that come out like this on the regular. And they're just, there's also a video of her kind of yelling at them as they taunt her from the window. This is, very kind of elderly woman in a hijab, looking at these people, up in her house, yelling at her from her windows. And this is a country, that we're supposed to be so concerned about. Now it's really getting dangerous. Now it's really getting crazy. The far right government is taking control. Oh no, the wonderful, proud institution of Israeli democracy is going to be, taken away. And another great moment from these Israeli protests has been a clip that, a clip of this guy who, as there has been some sort of, shall we say, police response to these protests, and apparently in one of these police responses, there was a guy who said, I'm fighting in, my son is fighting in Hawara, which is a West Bank area where they're trying to currently, get out, ethnically cleanse could be another word, the Palestinians from there, to, fully move into the Israeli area, or get the Israelis to fully move into the area. And it's just like, it's just almost too on the nose. Like he's saying, my son is fighting for the true Israeli, politics and, the true Israeli, political ideal, the political dream of Israel, which is to have greater Israel from the river to the sea, as Benjamin Netanyahu famously said. Just to be completely Jewish, a singular home for the Jews and for nobody else. That is the end goal of this state. If you listen to people who are in the government, people who are even on the streets, they will tell you that is what they're fighting for when push comes to shove. That is their final goal that they have in mind. That just, obviously would not be very palatable to Western forces. It just would not be something that they like to hear. And simple as that, it really just becomes it comes full circle, kind of in a moment like this. The government's supporters, many of them from more nationalist and religious backgrounds, largely believe the opposite. The country is being stolen by a political opposition that has refused to accept its losses, not only in a series of democratic elections, but also through sweeping demographic and cultural changes that have challenged the once dominant vision of the country. Again, what have these cultural changes have been? I really don't know. So Avi Abelo, who is a podcast host from Efrat, a Jewish settlement on the occupied West Bank, said it should really be called a coup, not a protest movement anymore. They're willing to destroy the unity of the Israeli people. They're willing to destroy the unity of the Israeli army and destroy Israeli democracy to hold on to their power. So this is probably somebody who's, if he's out there settling, doing a podcast from the settlements. That's really pretty dark there. He's definitely going to be somebody who's, wants to see this project pushed forward. And he knows, again, it's really people who are either being completely, because again, I haven't heard any of the people who are opposed to the judicial overhaul say, what is the nightmare scenario? What is Benjamin Netanyahu and this right-wing government going to use them to do? Like, are they going to, create more settlements? Are they going to, that's not something I've heard them object to and say, oh, they're going to do this to create more settlements. We have to stop this. I've heard none of that. All I've heard is this, because honestly, it kind of does seem, like two factions competing for power, because I think, It's interesting because on one side you have the more liberal Zionist faction, which is going to be much better at relating to and supporting, the United States, and may get to that, in getting support from the United States. Presenting a palatable image of Israel so that democratic leaders even in the United States could support it. And they'll probably be a little bit slower on the getting to the end goal of Israel, which is, again, as I said, 100% Jewish. Throughout from the river to the sea, and they are going to be kind of put up against this other side, this right-wing faction, the Benjamin Netanyahus of the world, who are going to be, maybe a little bit less palatable to people in the United States. Joe Biden can come out and criticize them. It's an acceptable thing to do, as we talked about on the show last week, all about this whole brouhaha of Isaac Herzog coming and, a lot of criticism being leveled from the left of the mainstream U.S. political spectrum towards the Democratic government, the Israeli government. And, so essentially what they've said from there is, it definitely makes things a little bit more awkward. But in terms of are they going to get the job done? Are they going to push through these settlements a lot faster? Yes, they are. And probably, a lot more kind of political graft, a lot of corruption coming from them as they want to, again, shift the power to the right wing. It's very, very interesting stuff here. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition is set to pass a law on Monday that will limit the ways in which the Supreme Court can overrule the government. Its plan has become a proxy for a broader emotional and even existential battle about the nature of the Israeli state, who it controls it, and who shapes its future. Those disputes reflect a painful schism in Israeli society between those who seek a more secular and pluralist country and those with a more religious and nationalist vision about how to maintain Israel's self-image as a Jewish and democratic state amid a disagreement about what those concepts mean. Again, what's the disagreement here? It's like I have not really even seen it elucidated. Other one could give more power to Netanyahu. Again, you can just vote him out at the next election, and you'll have the same power if you're, Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz come in there again. It would bar the court from using the contentious legal standard of reasonableness to block government decisions, giving ministers greater leeway to act without judicial oversight. Again, to do what? What is their fear about this? I just don't really understand it. The government says the change would enhance democracy by making elected lawmakers freer to enact what voters chose them to do. The opposition insists it would damage democracy overreach by removing a key check on government overreach, paving the way for the governing coalition, the most conservative and nationalist in Israel's history, to create a more authoritarian and less pluralist society. So again, this is really what it comes down to is, I think bottom line here is, are we going to keep up the fiction? The right wing says, let's drop this fiction, let's drop this mask of, we're pluralists, we include gays, we include some Arabs in some very, very limited roles, and that makes us the best pluralistic society, and all this, bullcrap you hear coming out of them at all times, the liberal Zionists of the world. And then the right says, why not let's just admit who we are? Come on. Are they going to keep it the fiction? How hard are they going to push to keep up that fiction? I think it's going to be a very, very interesting debate and discussion down the road. So with that being said, it is now time to go to our next story. All right, so next up on the show today, we have a very interesting story coming out of the DeSantis campaign. And it comes here, it's always good, meaning it's always not good, when you get a Maggie Haberman, Shane Goldmacher, New York Times right up on your campaign, which honestly is pretty heavily sourced here. Let's go through it here for a little bit. 2 months in, however, Ron DeSantis' sputtering presidential campaign is struggling to gain traction. Allies are complaining about the lack of a coherent message about why Republican voters would choose DeSantis over President Donald J. Trump. Early strategic fissures have emerged between his own political team and the enormous super PAC that will spend tens of millions of dollars to help him. His Tallahassee-based campaign has been shedding some of the 90 workers it had hired, roughly double the Trump campaign payroll, to cut swelling costs that included $279,000 at the Four Seasons in Miami. Now, he's trying to make the DeSantis candidacy, apparently Ron, is trying to, fashion his candidacy into an insurgent attack on kind of the Republican Party here. Which is, pretty interesting because, does he have someone like Trump? He has obviously the personal political charisma to pull that off. Does DeSantis, as he, by the way, is now slipping behind Vivek Ramaswamy, of all people, does he have the political charisma to pull it off? I do not think so. So days after the first public glimpse into his political finances showed unsustainable levels of spending, including a taste for private planes and a fundraising operation that was alarmingly dependent on its biggest contributors and that did not meet its expectations. One recent move that drew intense pullback, including from Republicans, was the campaign's sharing of a bizarre on Twitter that attacked Trump as too friendly to LGBTQ people and showed DeSantis with lasers coming out of his eyes. Some called it homophobic and others homoerotic before it was deleted. But It turns out it was to be more of a self-inflicted wound than was previously known, as the DeSantis campaign aide had originally produced a video internally, passing it off as an outsider supporter to passing it off to an outside supporter to post it first and making it appear as if it was generated independently, according to a person with knowledge of the incident. The campaign declined to comment on the specific questions about the candidate's travel and video. Andrew Romeo, said in a statement, the communication director said he was ready to prove the data is wrong. Again, our campaign is prepared to execute on his vision for the great American comeback. So again, talking about media elites, DC elites, whatever. And yeah, I think that ad that I don't know if you everyone has seen it or not. I mean, I honestly, unless you want to get the early stages of some sort of brain cancer, I wouldn't entirely recommend it. Unless you want to see something just really stupid and pretty crazy. It's essentially him coming, all these clips of Trump being, very friendly to LGBTQ people, saying, Caitlyn Jenner can use any bathroom she wants in Trump Tower, or something like that. It was a really rough Trump impersonation there, but, and then, DeSantis, and then the cuts to, clips of Tommy Shelby and Patrick Bateman interspersed with DeSantis being like, oh, I cut every single LGBTQ protection law. This is about the gay people. It's just like, again, this is on. I've heard a lot of people say this, but I think it becomes more and more true every day. This is a kind of sick, twisted inverse of what the Elizabeth Warren campaign was for the 2020 primary on the Democratic side, which is somebody who was, definitely someone who is a little bit more of a nerd, to say the least. I would say Elizabeth Warren, by the way, far more charismatic, far more likable, far more normal of a person than Ron DeSantis is. Let's go through the list here of things wrong with this campaign. Number one, him. We talked about this in brief recently, which was the fact that he's just an unlikable, weird guy. He's not good at retail politics. He's not good at appearing charismatic. He's not good at giving big speeches. He's not good at, meeting voters in the pizza parlor, whatever. They are both, really, really not good at points for him. And he's just somebody who does not come off as a, charismatic person who has the political skill and ability to go beyond, maybe a House race or even a governor's race. It's surprising that he got there in the first place with just his level of just weirdness, just blatant weirdness. The sound of his voice, his presentation on everything, just so weird. It's very hard to kind of imagine him having any kind of, moments of coolness, moments of relatability that you would need to even get close to something like the top of the presidential polls on the Republican side. Second of all, he has a campaign that just fundamentally misunderstands, the political moment, and honestly is very, very, like the Elizabeth Warren campaign, is very, very online, very, very policy focused, but really on the policies that, very few people actually care about. I think the Warren campaign had far more, on the ball even when it comes to this stuff. It really is kind of in the vein of, and I know Trump. The funny thing is Trump picked a lot of these guys. He wanted a lot of these guys, but it reminds me a lot of Blake Masters in Arizona, which actually I don't think Trump. He was a pretty big fan of. He was originally a Tealite, this Blake Masters guy. But he was just someone who came off as incredibly creepy and incredibly online, and someone who would use these. If you're not someone who's an online person, I would not want to, poison your brain anymore. But he would use these kind of figures, these like drawn out he would post both in the video I just referenced and another recent video that was probably passed off, from inside the campaign out to, an outside supporter. He uses these, very kind of 4chan, Reddit type of figures to be like, Trump bad, DeSantis good, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just like, dude, what are you doing? This is not a 4chan campaign to be president of 4chan. Like, you are trying to run and communicate to mostly, 50 plus everyday Fox News watchers. You're trying to throw the red meat to them and not to either the people who are, sitting in their mom's basement at, age 23, just posting on 4chan and Reddit and things like that all day. And you're not also, by the way, you're not trying to meet or trying to, appeal to people like, those of the Hamptons or Park City, Utah, and, all these fancy places where he's trying to get contributions and donations from. One senior DeSantis advisor who supposed to oversee the campaign's messaging on television recently departed, and as the reality of a disappearing advertising budget set in. Now the governor is expected to hold smaller scale events in early states while outsourcing some event planning to outside groups to tamp down cost. His team, for the second time in 3 months, is telegraphing a plan to engage more with the mainstream media. He has long derided, calling the DeSantis is everywhere approach. Ugh, I don't know about that. I don't want DeSantis everywhere. Please, no. The DeSantis supporters have watched anxiously as Trump has swamped the governor in coverage and outmaneuvered him in defining the contours of the race. Since the entry, DeSantis has received 0 congressional endorsements because, again, it's not just the TV that makes him seem very unlikable. He's an unlikable person. It was very, very telling when all the people, a lot of the Florida congressional delegation met with the guy, immediately turned around and endorsed Donald Trump. Like that is essentially where they hate him. He's somebody who does not do the kind of politics of, call you on your birthday, give you a pat on the back, check in with you kind of guy. And which Trump, surprisingly, I think it is a bit surprising because he's somebody who's so just, self-focused. But he does take the time to call people when they're in the hospital, whatever. And that does count for something in a really kind of backbiting, but also, kind of, insular circle of Republican politics. And it's like, if you want to get these people out on your side, you got to throw them some bones, not just, be rude to them and be weird to them all the time. Since his entry, DeSantis has received, again, 0 congressional endorsements. And one person close to DeSantis who requested anonymity to speak candidly about the candidate whom the person still supports. So the governor experienced a challenging learning curve that has left him a little bit jarred. He apparently is trying to pursue an underdog approach going forward. All DeSantis needs to drive news and win this primary is a mic and a crowd, according to the campaign manager, Janera Peck, of the DeSantis campaign. So, again, a little bit crazy there, in my opinion, because that may help him at least help him the least to have people come out and hear his voice more. But I mean, you're talking about he is not connecting with the right people. He personally is weird. His campaign just does not seem to get the issues. They're posting all these like Reddit style memes of just people who are incredibly socially conservative, a far small online few, the Blake Masterites of the world, the Blake Master. All Chris Rufo, all these people who frankly lost the 2022 election for the Republicans by going really overboard on cultural war issues and not in any way saying, we're going to be, the more normal version of Trump, which I mean, probably would have been your best case scenario, if you really could have consolidated, more normal, less weird, less chaotic version of Trump, who's still essentially going to do all the same things. That is a very, probably the best case you would have won. You still probably would have lost, but it would be at 30-40 rather than 20-10 in terms of percentage points. So it is really clear here that, because of a large confluence of factors, personal weirdness, campaign being filled, with also just very online, Zoomers who are posting these very unrelatable memes and obviously giving him, to seem kind of cool, I guess, and giving the candidate some very, very bad advice, which he is, eagerly lapping up because he is just about as dumb as they are. And also the fact that, that has led him to put out and put forward a message that is just fundamentally not resonating with the Republican base. They still think that, okay, DeSantis is more conservative. He's more crazy on the social issues, but I like Trump more. He's just fundamentally not a likable person. And he's just not giving people what they want. You definitely get, I'd say 30% of the Republican base at a minimum if you began to push Trump and say, okay, this guy, not the most normal here, he like we could do a lot of what he's doing, and skate by a little easier. If you really start to push in that direction and actually, deliver on some of the key promises on immigration, whatever, you could begin to crack, although I think it's very, very tough to imagine, but either way, it's still going to be a very long road for DeSantis. He still has time to reset. There have been no debates yet as his super PAC, which is called Never Back Down, brought in $130 million. And the first votes are nearly 6 months away in Iowa, where Trump has made missteps of his own. So it seems like, though, DeSantis' campaign pretty much down for the counts. All right, now to our next story, where John Schwartz has this in The Intercept. On Thursday, the Senate Committee on Health, Education, and Labor and Pensions has voted to take a pretty significant step on a long road that could lead to far lower prices on new, better pharmaceutical drugs for Americans. The measures was part of an amendment to a bill reauthorizing the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Act and was reported out of the committee 17-3. It allocates $3 million for the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine to study models to pay for development of new drugs. NASEM, or NASEM, which was created by the Congress to provide high-quality advice on technical issues, would have to produce the report within 2 years. The bill's language specifically instructs NASEM to examine two ways of funding new drugs: the government paying for directly and innovation prizes for inventors. Drugs created in this manner would presumably then be placed in the public domain and sold as generics. The issue is almost never discussed in U.S. politics and would likely sound arcane and meaningless to most people if they ever heard about it, but in reality, it's both easy to understand and powerfully relevant to all of our lives. Different ways of paying for drug development could generate more drugs that we desperately need, while at the same time saving regular people huge amounts of money. The most important thing to understand about drugs is that they're expensive to discover and test for safety and efficacy, but once that's done, they're generally cheap to manufacture. So it gets the R&D, which, by the way, is mostly funded by government labs and government kind of intelligence, I guess you could say. According to the FDA, when a patent on a drug is expired, there are nearly 5 generic companies producing it. The price will fall by nearly 85%. In the 10 years from 2009 to 2019, the lower cost of generics saved the U.S. healthcare system $2.2 trillion. The current way of dealing with this is so entrenched that it seems like a law of nature. First, pharmaceutical companies pay the high cost of developing new drugs. At least theoretically, the federal government often pays a significant chunk of the upfront outlays, though. So it's an important thing to remember. AOC has done a good job of highlighting that in the past. Then the drug companies can make a profit on their investment. So they're granted a patent on their discoveries that lasts about 20 years. This gives them them alone the right to make and sell the drug. In other words, for 2 decades, the government steps in to prevent a free market from functioning. The most striking recent example of this is the vaccines for COVID. Moderna raked in $36 billion for its vaccine in 2021 and 2022, and if you try to make and sell a version of it yourself, you will go to jail. The case is especially galling given that the government paid even more than usual for the drug's development costs. The proposed study could lay the ground for a new world in which the government would use different mechanisms to introduce, in another pandemic, for example, to create incentives for the creation of treatments. Pharmaceutical companies would still make money, but just not gargantuan amounts of it, thanks to a public health emergency. So it's very, very interesting to see how, where this honestly goes back to the beginning of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. The Congress shall have the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. It's important to read this carefully, however, as Congress has the power to grant patents, but it is not required to do so. So, yeah, I mean, it seems pretty ripe to consider whether the current system serves the will and convenience of society. The U.S. pharmaceutical industry is incredibly costly, with 2021 revenues of $550 billion and profits far higher than those of other industries. But the price may not be the worst part of it. Patents perversely disincentivize companies from developing actual cures, because when a patient is cured, they will no longer need the drug. As Chris Rock once put it, there ain't no money in the cure. The money's in the medicine. That's how the drug dealer makes his money on the comeback, which is a really kind of great point and a really real point, because it shows so much in the way that we could, easily develop drugs for things, but it's just not profitable. And we could, put these issues to rest, but it is, again, just not profitable to give a full and complete cure. Over 1 million people now are killed every year by antibiotic-resistant bacteria, with the number potentially rising to 10 million by 2050. This is also a problem for new classes of drugs. Goldman Sachs analysts explained it straightforwardly in 2018, writing in a report, the potential to deliver one-shot cures is the most attractive aspects of gene therapy, but while the proposition carries tremendous value for patients and society, it could represent a challenge for genome medicine developers looking for sustained cash flow. Got to have that sustained cash flow, folks. But anyway, it's going to be very, very interesting to see where this goes, and a very, very encouraging step that the Bernie Sanders committee has put forward this commissioned this report to look at new ways of funding for these drugs and actually assuming some control, because it really comes down to this: when we put so much money, and we see this throughout bailouts, we see this through pretty much every possible investment the government can make. We as public money, your money, my money, everyone's money goes towards investing in this, subsidizing that, A, B, C, whatever example you want. There's a million examples you could point to, and we get nothing from it. We just get absolutely scammed. We get absolutely marked up, and forced to pay more for the things that American tax dollars help fund, and that. If that were to come to an end, especially when it comes to life-saving prescription medicine, that could be a very positive development, to say the least. All right, definitely something to keep an eye on there. Let's go now to our final story in just a second. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening and supporting Newsflash. We now have a brand new way for you to be heard if you want. Whether a text message or a audio message, please no video messages. I really just do not think that's necessary. We have a new feedback box open for you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is officially open. SWRN702@gmail.com. Send a text message, send a voice message of no more than 30 seconds via the voice memos function. Either of those two options, and we will 100%, not going to find this guarantee anywhere else. We're going to play it on the show, listen to what you have to say, and it literally could be about anything. Well, if it's inappropriate, we won't play it, but it could be about anything. Thank you so much. This is my thank you to all the listeners who have stuck out with us and want to have their own voice in the show. SWRN702@gmail.com is the address. Very interesting situation going on right now in Spain. And I mean, literally right now, the results are coming in as we are looking at a pretty interesting last few hours in the Spanish general elections, which are going to be very, very interesting stuff to kind of break down here. There's a great little interview in Jacobin that we're going to read the lead up to, go through here, and set the scene up for these elections. And it's an interview with Zema Guijarro. I hope I'm saying that name right. But this is written here by Owen Gilmartin. He writes, I know that many people are worried, but Spain is much greater than Vox, insisted the country's left-wing Deputy Prime Minister Yolanda Diaz at the end of the final debate before today's general election. She came away from Thursday's contest as the unanimous winner, forcefully confronting Vox's far-right leader Santiago Abascal on workers' rights and gender violence, while calling out her coalition partner, the center-left Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, for his reticence to tackle the country's housing crisis, redefending a public housing stock, not tax breaks for developers, Diaz told him. So in kind of a four-way debate, there's plenty of four main parties right now in Spain. The prior to the election, oh my goodness, prior to the election, we had party for a Socialist Party up in charge, kind of the center-left party at with Pedro Sanchez in government. Sumar is kind of the left-wing, smaller left-wing party, and the people, which Yolanda Diaz, the woman who we just quoted, is in charge of, and People's Party and Vox are the bigger and smaller right-wing parties, respectively. Vox being, the incredibly far-right party there as well. So she came away a pretty big winner, and yet while her left-wing New Left Unity Sumar platform has gained real traction during the final stretch of the campaign. The prospect of the far right entering government for the first time since the country transitioned to power in the 1970s, transition away from the Franco regime in the 1970s remains present. Final polling last weekend showed the gap between the right and the left blocs tightening, but a coalition between the Conservative Popular Party and Vox still looks the most likely, though with increasingly high chance of a hung parliament. El País' final poll from Monday, the right bloc is 3 seats short, with Partido Popular, PP, leading Sanchez's socialist 32.9 to 28.7%, or 135 seats to 110, while Vox and Sumar are tied at 13.5% and between 36 to 38 seats each. In such an outcome, the right bloc would probably be able to count on a support from a small number of regional MPs to secure a wafer-thin majority, but a late left-wing mobilization could turn the tables. In particular, Vox and Sumar are currently in a battle for the last seat in 14 small or medium-sized provinces. Whoever finishes third will likely take the prize. If this battle is one priority for Sumar, the other has been ensuring that it gets out the vote in major urban areas. This campaign has been fought on 2 fronts: confrontation with the Spanish right, which, they have been, unsurprisingly been far more aggressive and challenging than the, mainstream Socialist Party. So second, though, we have Sumar's ambitious program guaranteeing a series of new tangible rights in work, housing, and healthcare, including expansion of public services to include free dental and eye care, a gradual reduction of the working week to 32 hours over the course of the next legislature, a massive program of public housing construction, and a groundbreaking universal inheritance scheme, which would see all 23-year-olds in Spain receiving 20,000 euros, to kickstart a life project of their choosing. The PP's leader, Alberto Núñez Feijóo, into the election campaign believing that his victory was assured, not least because of a constant demonization of the PSOE Unidas Podemos coalition by a right-wing dominated press over the last 3 years. Divisions on the radical left has also become an issue, with Diaz and Podemos struggling to reach a left unity deal after early elections were called, with a final agreement creating a further internal tensions as Diaz imposed a clear out of Pablo Iglesias' old guard from the left front bench. Sumar's Seymour Guerrero, a member of the Congress of Deputies, thinks the new left-wing platform can play a decisive role in the outcome of today's vote. Topping Sumar's list in Alicante, Guerrero says that Diaz's appeal as a candidate, this is the left-wing, most left-wing leader in the race, part of this left unity ticket of this Podemos party, which is originally the left-wing party, major kind of secondary left-wing party behind Pedro Sanchez's Socialist Party. They are coming in unified and with, some pretty interesting, some tangible policies there for sure. Guijarro says Diaz's appeal as a candidate rests on not only the ability to take on the far right, but also articulating an alternative future on the horizon, which is such an interesting point there. And something that, we really don't see anywhere else in Europe, or especially in the Democratic Party here, right now. Look at, SPD, for example, in Germany. Look at, I think LFI and Noops in France do a pretty good job, but, it really is so important to just, again, not be fear-mongering about the right, but actually give people something to hope for. That type of politics is almost so dangerous, because it feels so dangerous, at least because how rare it is and how so little you see some actual, planning, some actual thought given to what comes after we defeat the far right, instead of just using the far right as a mobilizing tactic, to just to get people out to the polls, and then, just gradually wean them down into very basic, kind of standard neoliberal policies of just not really doing much of anything. But I think it is important to see, and we're going to go to now the results of that election. With 98% counted, the others are on 28. Sumar is on 31 seats. They're down. That's down 7. Vox, the people, or the far right party, is on 19. Down 19 on 33, just edging out Sumar. And the Socialist Party is on 122 seats, with the People's Party leading on 136 seats. Which, when you tally up all the the main blocks, the left wing edges out, just barely, the left wing bloc in the parliament barely edges out the right wing bloc in the parliament, 172 to 171, with 7 junts, which I guess is the Catalonian Nationalist Party, the region around Barcelona, essentially, that wants to be independent and has wanted to be independent for quite a while, which is a really pretty big upset, defying polls and putting incumbent Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez in a position to remain in power even without a snap election. A few months ago, the widespread belief was the far right would win convincingly. Instead, they lost, with Sanchez calling an unexpected snap election in the aftermath of disastrous regional elections, surprising many commentators. It proved to be a stroke of genius as he defied political gravity to emerge with more seats, in fact, 2 more seats than he won in 2019, which is a pretty big deal, to say the least. Something to remember, this is from Stats for Lefties, a great British-based kind of European left-wing account that goes through polls and stuff like that on Twitter at Lefty Stats. Something to remember here is that the People's Party surge looks huge. It was almost entirely down to squeezing Vox and some of the others out there, some of the other smaller parties. They didn't convert anyone on the left, with the PSOE actually gaining seats and Sumar losing a handful due to tactical voting. They were down 7, which is a pretty big deal as well. A lot of people are saying, and I'm looking kind of into this puts them in a pretty interesting position. As the right has moved more to the right, the left seeming more unified and getting a lot of momentum here, coming into what is going to be a pretty unstable government. Obviously, 172 to 171 and in the two, left-wing and right-wing blocks. That's not going to, go over too well for too long. So, could come time to go to the polls again, and it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens as we continue to follow this. Basically, the PP squeezed their right-wing allies as much as they possibly could and polarized Spanish politics between the left and the right, and it just wasn't enough. So a pretty big failure there, which is going to be quite interesting to process and take in. That's all the time we got for today, though. We're going to be back tomorrow.